Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. So I'd like to thank the Deputy for bringing this proposition and keeping AV and STV in everybody's minds. I think it's important. I'd also like to thank him for agreeing the amendment, because if we were to move forward, I think it's important that we would have time to do the job properly. I'm not going to talk about either of the two systems or how they work. That's not really for today, because it is my view that actually the first past the post system isn't necessarily the best system that we could have. Having said that, we don't help ourselves. We have 3 different types of elected states member, and we have constituencies which aren't always the same number. I was minded to support the amended proposition, but after listening to Senator Ozef and the promise of the 1 month extra for PPC to come back, I think it's important that we wait, because while I might agree with AV or an STV, I equally think that it's very, very important that we consider those 2 other issues, that is the type of states member and the size of constituencies at the same time, because piecemeal the proposition won't work. So for those reasons, I will be waiting for PPC and not supporting this.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I should perhaps begin by declaring a form of interest in that had the proposals as now outlined been in force the election before last, I might have been before you some 3 years earlier. I go back to Deputy Fondre's opening remarks earlier this morning that aren't we making a mountain out of a molehill on this? It seems to me there are 3 issues here. One is that all we're doing is going out for consultation at the moment, and what harm is that? Secondly, I do take the point that it is a piecemeal operation, but it doesn't invalidate what it is for its own sake. It will be relevant for the various forms of membership we already have. And thirdly, I note that it's not due to come into force until 2022 in any event. Surely that's enough time for us to get our house in order to do something more fundamental if required. I will therefore be supporting the proposition.
Deputy Breen.
Thank you very much, sir. I have to express surprise at any member of this Assembly who does not support this proposition as amended. The whole point behind the Privileges and Procedures Committee amendment was to go out to consult with the public. What's wrong in that? What are we scared about in consulting with the public? We are here to represent the public. We are not here to represent anything other than that. And whilst we may have views on whether or not we believe STV, AV is too complicated or whatever, to fail to consult the public on what is such a fundamentally important point would be doing a disservice to the public. So I would reiterate the point I made at the beginning. I cannot see why any member of this Assembly would vote against the proposition as amended. There is nothing to be scared about in consulting the public, and perhaps the sooner some members of this Assembly understood that point, then a better system of government we may have. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. Following on from Deputy Bree, I think we do consult the public. We consult them on an election every 3 years and soon to come every 4 years. And we're quite happy with their results then, if we deem to be good enough to be here. But it is true. I mean, people who say that the electorate might not understand, for years people have been coming up to me and saying, why can't I put you as number 2 or number 1? Or I don't want you anywhere, but I want this and I want to put it in a preference. They absolutely understand. We are making, Deputy Tadia made a very big mistake, the usual you get in a, I accept PPC's amendment, thinking all the PPC are going to be behind you. And now we hear from Senator Ozef, who was in the debate, ran PPC and was accepting of this. But we need to ask the public. This is actual, the public are done to death with electoral reform. When did we actually ask the public? Very rare, not clothier. We've messed up. We have messed up. That's the only thing I do agree with in Senator Rose's speech. We've messed up monumentally ourselves without any help from the public. Look, it's a no-brainer. It says, go out and consult. To allay the fears of the Deputy of Groove Hill, says PPC are going to come back if the whole of the public say, oh, this is ridiculous. We don't want this. We don't understand it. It'll never work. And actually, to say people won't understand, I think is quite insulting, but let's go beyond that. Do you really think any president of PPC would come back to this House after full consultation and say, well, actually, there you go, there's a report, everyone says no, or most of them say no, and we've even had an STV on it, an ATV on it, and every other result you can have on it, but they all say no. It's not going to happen. All the deputy is asking, and again, another shock speak from Senator Balash, who was the leader of the Electoral Commission, and it did say, when Mr. Rennick came over, Professor Rennick came down the town hall and said, sir, whatever you go with, and we don't know what that is, if it's Senator Osif, horse that looks like a camel or a camel that looks like a horse, it's got 3 humps. I've got the very much hump at the moment because we are literally being told again piecemeal. Sorry, you've done piecemeal for the last 16 years since you went out to Clovia, and now today a very sensible, very really inconscientious, and that's wrong, uncontroversial, that's it. And even that was wrong. It doesn't matter. What you are saying is go out and ask the public. Have some consultation. Give it in the hands of PPC. The GREF will help PPC, which they always do. They're doing fantastic work on social media, everything. If you don't think the public are consulted, they're consulted now 3 years, it will be every 4 years. Give them a bit more credit. Get behind Deputy Tadia and do not listen to the scaremongers that, this will disrail everything that PPC subcommittee have got coming forward. Because I'd like to be on that train, actually, when it comes to the station, because I won't think it before the 2018 elections. Sorry, sir. I support this, and I say, don't make a mountain out of the molehill. Please support this amendment. I'm not even saying whether I support these changes. I want to know what the public think, and so should all of you. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on that? Connie Harvison.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of words, because the Deputy Martin is completely correct. We need to consult the public, but the problem I have is that we keep consulting the public in one form or another, but it comes back to this assembly, and this assembly doesn't listen to what the public wants. So I have a real difficulty with this because, yes, the Electoral Commission put forward as a sort of supplementary recommendation that this needed to be looked at. But I was on the Electoral Commission, and even for me, the memory of that is distant now, how we got to where we are. But originally, when the terms of reference were discussed, analysis of the voting system was in the Commission's terms of reference. And it was specifically removed by this Assembly because, as I recall, another piece of work was being undertaken at that time to examine exactly that voting system by the PPC, and it was decided that there shouldn't be two tandem consultations on the same thing going forward. I mean, that's what I've dug out from the notes that I've been able to find so far. I don't know what happened to that piece of work that PPC were doing then, but I do know that this specific point was taken out of the terms of reference of the Commission so that that work could go ahead unhindered. I'm concerned that perhaps consultation has happened already, but that nothing, again, has been done about it. As I say, it was impossible, though, for the Commission to work in a vacuum, looking at the elements that were remaining within our terms of reference without these peripheral issues forming part of the research. And that's why we had these supplementary recommendations. But I am at my wit's end with consulting the public and having the public express a view and then having nothing go forward. especially when it happens within an organised framework. So, yes, by all means, we should consult the public, but don't members think that before we ask the public what they think about something, we actually ought to decide of whether we understand it ourselves? Because from all over the different areas of this assembly today, I've heard people express different concerns about something that we haven't actually had an informal chat about. And to make sure that we as members know what the implications could be, so that when we consult with the public and when our constituents say, I notice you've launched a consultation on STV, can you tell me, Constable, what exactly does that mean? I know that my constituents will get the same answer that all of your constituents will get, because we haven't discussed that, and it's quite clear from what I've heard this morning, although actually it is very simple if you look at it in black and white. When you try to explain it to people, all sorts of nuances seem to creep in that may or may not be. I mean, is it BODMAS? Do we have the brackets +1 first, or do we divide it? Well, there is a simple way to do it, but we have to be all singing, as they say, from the same hymn sheet. And I'm so reluctant to consult the public again on something that we might say, well, yes, thanks for your views, they're very important. 98% of you said yes, but actually no, let's not bother doing that. Because we're in grave danger of, when we're trying to do something which will hopefully re-energise some part of the voting process and will hopefully engage with another section of the voting public, or encourage people to vote because they can see that, yes, under a proposed new system, their vote might actually mean something, when actually we're in danger of saying to them, thanks very much for telling us what you think, but no thank you. So this is a really difficult thing for me, because I said to myself after the referendum result, which was, staggering, that we should not do anything consulting the public again with a meaningful consultation unless we were really, really going to listen to what they had to say. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I want to briefly address the issue which underpins why we're talking about electoral reform at all in the first place. And that is the issue of turnout, and how do we get, in Jersey particularly, how do we get people to turn out? Well, I would suggest that an example of how not to do it is illustrated by the recent referendum in the UK. We seem to make a mess of referenda in Jersey, but equally, you could say that in the UK they've done similar, because they apparently have a very clear instruction, 52 to 48, Brexit, except that 52 to 48 is of those who voted, which leaves actually 37% of the electorate saying let's get out, opposed by 36%, another minority, saying no, let's stay in, and 27% of the population said can't be bothered, not committed, don't want to vote, don't want to bother. And that's what we've got in Jersey. Now, if I were to take a look at the most common reason for not voting that I hear when I'm doing my door knocking from time to time, it says words to the effect of, my vote doesn't count. I've voted time and time and time again, and my father before me voted time and time again. Nothing seems to change. Nothing changes. And what's the consequence of my vote doesn't count and nothing changes is the apathy, so-called apathy, that we see now, a reluctance to vote to bother. How might we change that? We might offer people a vote which is actually preferential. You put down your first choice, 1, 2, 3, you stop. And somewhere in there, your vote does start to count. And we're told that because we haven't tackled the big issues, the major reform that we should have tackled in the last 16 years, we can't possibly do anything else to improve our system. Well, that's a complete nonsense of an argument. And I remind people that we've heard lots of reasons about why we shouldn't vote for this. And the classics are coming out, that it's a piecemeal piece of work. It's the wrong time to do it. Yes, I'm in principle, I'm in favour of it, but don't do it now. We've even had a move on reference early in the debate to just try and get a thing off the agenda again. This might not be the perfect way to amend our system. Nonetheless, it's the one we've got in front of us now. And I remind members, as many have done already, that this is the amended proposition, not in its pure form. We're not voting to engage with STV or AV today. We're voting to consult the public on the plans to engage. And that's actually a very safe thing to do. Now, as long as I have a caveat around that, as long as part of the consultation, we do take the trouble to explain how the system works, at least once to people, and as long as we don't use Deputy Wickenden to do that explanation, they might well understand it. But I've rarely heard such a genuine bid to be a minister in the next in the next assembly. The degree of obfuscation and difficulty he persuaded me, almost persuaded me not to vote for it as well. It was so complex. I was reminded of the fact that once I was taught by Professor Elton in Surrey, and he got me in 1 hour and a half session to understand relativity from beginning to end. And I know I understood it then, and then when I left the assembly, the hour and a half lecture, it went again. It works like this. And I didn't quite grasp it again. Nonetheless, I only had to understand that once to now rely on it and trust that actually relativity is actually real and it does what it does. Similarly, the fact that we've got what is described as a complex system where you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until you've had enough, that's your favourites. Actually, I trust that that works. And as we've heard many times from Senator Green in this assembly, if you keep on doing what you've always done, you always get the same result. And I've heard Senator Green and his wise words, and for once, we couldn't agree more. So if we want a continuation of the low turnouts that we've had and the apparent apathy that says nothing ever changes, why should I bother, then just keep on with the same system. We'll get exactly that. The next election will have turnouts just like the last one and the one before that, except they're getting worse actually, probably have less. But let's try at least one change that may produce a difference rather than do the same again and get the same result.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Very well, I call on Deputy Tadier to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to most of those, no, only joking, all of those who have spoken. I'll start off by putting some questions out there, which I think we can answer in our heads, although I may just answer them anyway. Is our democracy in a healthy state? Is voter turnout low? Do we want to change this? Do we fully understand both STV and AV, or would we like to understand it better if we don't? Do we understand in global terms how it works? Do we understand that the deficiencies of first past the post exist and that it cannot always be trusted to pick the candidate or candidates with the most general support, and therefore there's a problem in the current system? So the starting point isn't what we sometimes hear, that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We know that something is broke and something needs fixing. And the evidence has been put there. There have been reports done by the Electoral Commission, which I'll quote from in a moment. But there's been lots of work done all around the world which tell us and point us in the direction that actually first-past-the-post system, whether that be for single or multi-seat constituencies, is at best suboptimal, but in fact, in many cases, it produces perverse and distorted results which do not represent what it's supposed to do. An election is supposed to be there to pick the most popular candidates. It is a popularity contest in that context, but obviously within the context of politics. And if you're not choosing the candidates who reflect the public's opinion, then something is wrong and something needs to be changed. And for me, this is very much a matter of conscience. I can't sit in this assembly and look my constituents in the eye, knowing that actually, in some cases, I can't be sure of whether or not I have the support, the requisite support of my constituents. And I think others should also be concerned about that. And more generally, we should put aside our own, as I'm sure we do, our own self-interest, because of course I've joked in the past that there can't be anything wrong with the current system because we all got elected under it, didn't we? So it works perfectly well. But who knows in a different system what the results would be and whether they would be slightly different. And in some cases it is marginal. But we know in the Jersey context where you're actually voting for a mixture of personalities, hopefully with some policies attached rather than necessarily along party political lines, then it's even more critical to make sure that the connect between this assembly and the public is reinforced. And I thank Deputy Southern for reminding us that actually we do hear quite often, and it was alluded to in the Electoral Commission's very own research, that people, one of the things that puts people off voting, not just in Jersey, is that their votes get wasted. The person or people or parties that they vote for, time and time don't get elected, and that can be due to things as arbitrary as the constituency boundaries or the number of seats that are available. So those are the framing arguments. So I would say, is our democracy in a healthy state? No, it isn't. Voter turnout is critically low. I think we all want to change this. We may not all necessarily understand how STV and AV work, but I think we understand globally how it works, and that's the point of a consultation. You know, I think we can accept today with this in-principle debate that there's something that does need to be looked at. There's a body of work, moreover, which the PVC chairman himself has said he is willing to engage in along with his committee. And it's not simply a referendum as we've had in the past. Let's talk to the public, see if they want to do this. And if they do, we'll bring it back to the Assembly and then the Assembly won't vote for it. I think it's much different to that. What we're actually asking today is to consider the pros and cons of the current system, how it actually might work in practice. And then once PPC's done that work, necessarily consulting with the public as part of it, we bring it back to this Assembly. And it's not that radical an idea. When the Council of Ministers decide that they want to build a new hospital or they want to change the way in which we deliver public services, of course there's a necessary consultation that goes out there. And we don't say, well, if the public don't want it, or if, why are we consulting the public endlessly? We do that in tandem because good government and good governance actually requires that we consult the public and that they know what is going along with. And this is exactly what's on the table today. I didn't feel comfortable after much thought of simply asking members to agree to this change in 2018, because I accept that these kind of new systems do take some time to get one's head around. So let's look at some of the other arguments. I was slightly disappointed by Senator Balash's comments, although I know he spoke partly in favour of the merits of both the new voting systems. But ultimately, he was the one who chaired the Electoral Commission, and it was the Electoral Commission themselves who highlighted in their report the merit and the case for changing the system to the STV or AV from the one we currently have. In fact, they started off by saying it would be impossible for this Commission to fulfil its task completely without considering the electoral system itself. They went on to say the Commission believes that consideration should be given to the introduction of STV for deputies' elections. And when it says deputies, of course, it's presuming multi-member seat constituencies, which would include senators under our current system. It says that STV voting is a system that more accurately reflects voter preferences than does first past the post. It results in fewer wasted votes. As a result, it can increase voter participation because electors have greater chance of seeing candidates for whom they expressed a preference to be elected. Their words, 6 states members' words, 3 and another 3 members of the public who put that report together. They go on to say that under the single transferable vote system, electors have a single vote which can be transferred from their first to second preference candidate and so on. Now, is this system overly complicated? Certainly, if we listen to some speakers who spoke, we would believe that it is very complex. But actually, let's look at what it entails. In fact, we can see that the STV can be reduced down to 5 simple steps, and that's when it comes to, well, the whole process. So you cast your vote, first of all, and that constitutes your choice of 1 to 3 to 5, depending how many places there are. So the first step is to compute the quota, which we do, and it's quite simple. We do it already when we have a single seat constituency. The quota is that you have the number of votes cast, so let's say it's 1,000 votes. You have the number of seats, which is 1. Then you add 1 to that, which gives you 2. And you divide the number of seats, the number of votes cast by the number of seats plus 1, which would give you, in this case, half. And you need to get half plus 1 to get elected. And that's how it currently works under the current system, except we don't really need a formula for that when it's such a simple way. We just call it a simple majority. But of course, when you have multiple seats, we just extrapolate exactly the same process for that. So in that kind of scenario where you have more than one seat to be chosen, that's the way that the formula would work. So not overly complicated. And it's set out anyway what the quota will be under the Droop system. I sent that out earlier today. The next step, number 2, is that you assign to candidates by first preference their votes. The third step, you declare as winner all candidates who receive at least the quota. Fourth step, you transfer the excess votes from the winner to the hopefuls. And then the fifth step is that you repeat 3 to 4 until no new candidates, until all the new candidates are elected. Pretty simple. I think a 5-year-old might have struggled to understand that. Adults would definitely struggle, but I think an 8-year-old would probably do quite well with that. But joking aside, I think it is actually an insult to members of the public, and it's actually an indictment on ourselves and on the staff who would actually be putting the consultation forward. If we were to choose to adopt that, it's not difficult at all. The difficulty, if there is any, surrounds perhaps the voting counting, which I will address now. But I'm going to try and stick to my notes because that's why I wrote them. So I don't think it's beyond the wit of most people to understand that. And I think the other point is that many countries already use the single transferable votes. These are not banana republics, or they're not countries which engage in donkey politics. I'm not going to mention any countries that might engage in donkey politics, as Senator Ozef said, because I think we need to keep relations with our sister island. Swedes.
It had nothing to do with Guernsey, sir.
But countries like Australia already use the single transferable vote. Canada uses the single transferable vote. The UK, for some of their elections, already use the single vote in Northern Ireland, and Scotland for European and local government elections. India, Pakistan, all Malta, all places in the Commonwealth, and we've talked about the Commonwealth already, and even the US in some of their constituencies for elections use the single transferable votes. Much bigger constituencies and voting public than what we have, and so I think to suggest that actually if they can do it, but we in little old Jersey can't do it, then that's not a genuine argument. Now, I must apologise in advance because Senator Ozef also lowered the tone of the debate by talking about sexually transmitted diseases, or STVs could be called sexually transmitted viruses, but of course we're not here to talk about that today, but I'm going to be talking about piles. It can be argued that the current system is much more complicated. I mean, how do you make piles for 25 candidates, which I understand is what currently happens when you have multiple votes on one ballot paper? The advantage of the system, and I know I'm looking at the Constable of St Mary's at the moment, is that she's concerned, like I am, about vote equity. It's a concern under the current system, not just about the weight that your vote has, but the fact that the principle of one man, one vote, one woman, one vote should be adhered to. And that is exactly what the single transferable vote and the alternative vote ensure. So obviously, in a single seat constituency, you will have one vote to cast, and that can be cast by putting an X under the current system, or it could be cast by putting a 1, 2, 3 to list your preferences. The same thing under the new system for single transferable votes. When faced with a long ballot paper for the senatorial elections, for example, with 8 seats to fill and actually potentially 30, 40 candidates in the next election, including our 8 reform candidates, which of course we will encourage people to vote for en bloc, then that's going to be quite an interesting way to do it. But we know that actually counting STV is much simpler initially because you just make as many piles as there are candidates. And it will be the case initially that we will know very quickly who the poll toppers are because they will have an excess of votes. So in that scenario where we have 40 candidates vying for 8 places, we'll know pretty quickly. I'm sure some of the political heavyweights might get 2 or 3 times their quota. They will be announced very quickly, and then those piles will simply be redistributed. And of course, it might be late into the night or the next day when we find out actually who the 7th and 8th places are. But in fact, much simpler to do. Also, the counting process is simpler insofar as it must be quite a job to go through a ballot paper currently, some of which will have 1, 2, 7 or 8 votes on them, and you have to then tally them up to the individual candidates. Each ballot paper will obviously go in a pile, and they can be counted as they are in places like Australia with banknote machines, so it speeds up the process much quicker. You have a pile for Senator McLean. Obviously, he would have exceeded his quota first of all, and they'll be counted, and then they go to the next places after that. So it actually, with the introduction of technology, it doesn't even need to be digital. Something as basic as actually either weighing piles, which already happens in banks, they weigh banknotes, or they count them through counting machines. You know, this all helps to facilitate and speed up the count of the votes. So I think the last point that I want to address, because of course I've got lots of notes here, and I think we all are ready to support this. We know that it's a moderate proposition, it's been amended. I think the last point that I wanted to address is the point that the Constable of St John's made about people getting their second choices. So nobody actually gets the first choice that they want, but they get everyone gets a second choice. Well, unfortunately, I usually like listening to the Constable of St John's, and I appreciated his breakfast analogy, but he did make something of a meal of this one, I think. The problem is, well, the good thing about the current system is that actually the candidate with the least support gets knocked out in the first round. So if actually nobody wanted chicken, then nobody would get chicken, because chicken would be immediately discounted after the first round of voting. So let's just to reiterate that, imagine you have a choice of 5 dishes. You've got chicken, beef, vegetable, fish, and kangaroo. There are 10 people who can potentially order. After the first round, 3 say, I want the beef curry. Another 3 say, I want a vegetable curry. 3 say, I want the fish curry. 1 says, I want the kangaroo curry, mate. But nobody wants the chicken. Yeah, you know, we can all eat chicken at home. Quite understand that. You're not going to pay necessarily to eat chicken. So chicken doesn't feature anymore. And then the kangaroo's votes would then get redistributed. That might go towards the fish. The vegetarians might actually find that they get dropped out. But the next preference for the vegetarians would be fish, and the people who wanted beef actually all settle on fish. So nobody has to eat chicken if they don't want chicken. The vegetarians perhaps a little bit annoyed, but actually it's okay because they're not vegetarians, they're pescatarians anyway. And their next preference is to vote for a fish, because at the end of the day we know that fish don't have souls, apart from a soul, of course. And so that's how the system works very basically. But how much more important is what we're doing than actually choosing a meal to eat, or choosing a colour of carpet for a club, which is the example that Dr. Rennick gives in his paper. It's actually about choosing the right people for the right job, and the ones that chime with the public mood at any one time. That's what we're doing here. And if there is a better system on the table than the one that we currently have, don't we all have an incumbent duty to make sure that those options are explored, put to the public and implemented if in fact it is better than what we currently have. So I make the proposition and ask for the appel.
That is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the proposition of Deputy Tadei as amended. Ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 22 votes pour, 24 votes contre, no abstentions.
22, please, sir.
Those voting for, the Connétables of St Clement, St Lawrence, St Bralard and St Saviour. Deputies Martin, Southern, Grouville, Le Fondre, Kevin Lewis, Tadier, Knoll, St John, Higgins, Masson, Rondell, Mesick, St Juan, Doublé, Labby, Brie, MacDonald and St Mary. Those voting contra, Senators Osoph, McLean, Gorst, Farnham, Balash, Green, Ferguson, the Connétables of St Helier, St Peter, St Mary, St Juan, St Martin, Grouville, St John and Trinity. The Deputy of Trinity and Deputies Pinnell, St Martin, Bryans, Andrew Lewis, Wickenden, Norton, Truscott and McClinton.
Very well. The next item of public business is the Draft Limited Liability Partnerships Jersey Law, P95 for 2016, lodged by the Chief Minister. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Limited Liability Partnerships Jersey Law 2000, a law to make provision for the establishment, dissolution and winding up of limited liability partnerships for their registration and for connected purposes. The State, subject to the sanction of Her Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Chief Minister.
Sir, could I ask Senator Osoph to act as rapporteur as it falls in his area of responsibility, please? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jersey was one of the first jurisdictions to enact a form of limited liability partnerships in 1997. LLPs have since that date become a very common vehicle globally, much as the company is a common corporate entity which, of course, members and many people understand. LLPs or their equivalent structures have been adopted since 1997 in many jurisdictions, including England, Wales, and various states in the US, China, Germany, Poland, Greece, Dubai, Japan, Qatar, and various provinces of Canada, and also in Singapore and India. And in 2015, the Cayman Islands, who I was pleased to speak to the Premier last night, introduced it in 2015. Closer to home, they've also been introduced by our friends in Guernsey and in the Isle of Man. And in England, I can tell members that there are approximately 60,000 LLPs. And India, there are approximately 7,000 LLPs. And that gives members a scale of their now widespread use. LLPs are typically used by lawyers, accountants, and other professional service bodies. Presently in Jersey, we have approximately 40 LLPs. With the new law, we expect that this number will increase in line with the international examples that I have cited. So limited liability partnerships are partnerships governed by the terms of their partnership agreements. They have some of the benefits that are offered by companies, including a separate legal personality and a form of limited liability. LLPs are flexible structures which can be used for a variety of purposes, not just professional services, but by small businesses and in the particular areas of bespoke financial services. They were innovative when they were introduced in 1997, if not, as members will recall, somewhat controversial. But since that date, in 1997, they have, as I say, become really quite commonplace in the suite of corporate vehicles that are available for commercial undertakings. The draft law would replace the Limited Liability Partnerships Jersey Law 1997, which I will just refer to as the 97 law. LLPs formed under the 97 laws will be transitioned across to the new draft law over a period of a year. The arrangements are set out for that. In fact, the 97 law was amended in 2007 when I was ED Minister at the time to amend the manner in which fees could be set by the registrar relating to the publishing of fees. It was then amended again in 2013 to remove the £5 million bond. Instead, the amendments introduced the concept of a solvency statement to protect creditors before partners could draw down on their partnership shares. And I recall that was a very good and constructive debate, which almost moved the somewhat difficult debate before then on to effectively what is now a widely accepted and extremely important corporate entity. The same protection is offered for limited liability partnerships as offered to creditors of Jersey companies. The new changes in the draft law will tidy up some of the changes that we made in 2013, modernise some of the wording, draw upon the lessons learnt from English case law, and restate the insolvency provisions that are simpler to interpret under the arrangements. I can inform members that consultation in the draft law happened, as always, with such legislation from January to March this year. The responses received were supportive of the law being brought to the Assembly. In fact, I can say that nobody objected to the proposed amendments in the consultation. I'm pleased to say that the scrutiny panel, which I enjoy a good and constructive relationship with, we try and have a no surprises policy, and I'm pleased that officials briefed the scrutiny panel in some detail in June, and then the scrutiny panel was asked prior to lodging whether or not they wanted any further information. I was grateful that the panel clearly were persuaded by the arguments, and maybe one of the panel members will confirm that, but they then did not require any further briefings, and consequently we lodged the law. I hope that colleagues on the scrutiny panel agree that they have been as what we wish them to be going forward. I see the Deputy Chairman in front of me across the chamber. I know that we have really tried, and we're going to try, to ensure that the scrutiny panel is involved in the drafting of legislation, so it just doesn't simply arrive in a completed form, so that they have their opportunity to understand and ask questions as appropriate. Law officers have considered the draft law and recommended the Statement of Human Rights compatibility statement, and it can be met. And for all of those reasons, sir, I would like to propose the principles of the draft law.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? All members in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. Those against? The principles are adopted. This is a matter for the Economic Affairs Scrutiny Panel. Deputy Chairman, I think. The Chairman doesn't appear to be.
What Sir Joseph said is quite correct, so we do not wish to investigate further. Thank you.
Senator Roland, how do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading? Then?
I think so. It's always tempting to do these things. It's on block, but I will be very, very, very brief. And I would say that what is going to be the practice that we want to try and involve in future is that actually we do actually separate out the effectively the reading of the principles for the articles, because we're in this position where we effectively have a one-stage legislative process which we're discussing with PPC. So I will do it in blocks if I may, but I will be very, very quick. I'll just draw members' perhaps attention to the most important provisions that are in the bill. I'll do it just by part if I may, very, 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 very swiftly. Article 1, very simple. Then the Part 1, the partnership agreement, just sets out exactly what that partnership agreement is, and that the fact that the affairs of a limited liability partnership and the rights and obligations should actually be set out, or they may be or in oral form. And this reflects the 1997 law. Articles 2, the requirements of the partner to contribute under principles of customary law. It's considered the issues of capital and whether or not there should be a contribution of skill and effort, which is consistent with the 97 law. 3 is just about property, provisions of Article 4 and 5, whether they deal with the debts and losses and whether or not the normal partnership and the partners would otherwise be liable. 5 addresses the limit liability of partners. 6, how the LLP must refer to itself from the benefit to benefit from limited liability status. In fact, so I've gone far too far, haven't I? Because I'm going actually dealing with part 1 and 2 in one go. I do apologise.
I think it's a matter for you, Senator, whether you can go through the various parts and then we vote.
I'll go on to 13, exactly. Forgive me, sir. I'm doing actually part 1 and 2 at the same time. Apologies for that. So 8 replaces the originally arrangements for the designated partner and the secretary. sets out Article 8, the Secretary must be appointed from the date that the LLP, it's just really mechanics of it, and what effectively the Secretary must do. 10, the LLP must take reasonable precautions to ensure documents and loss of destruction, etc., for all the regulatory purposes. 11, the duties of the LLP, and 12 provides for the definition of what is important in that in terms of the specified solvency statement, which can be summarised as a statement made by the limited liability partnership that the LLP is solvent now and will remain solvent until 12 months into the future when considering the financial resources available to the LLP. So I propose Articles 1 to 12.
As Articles 1 to 12 seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on Articles 1 to 12? Deputy Andrew Lewis.
Just a minor question for the Assistant Minister. Regarding solvency, what checks are undertaken to ensure that limited liability partnerships remain solvent during their lifetime? Would that be a matter for the FSC, or is it a matter for your department? But it clearly states here that they have to make a specific solvency statement, and they must have reasonable grounds for making the statement. But what checks and balances are in place to ensure that that statement is correct and doesn't go out of date in a short period, because corporate changes can happen sometimes very quickly. Thanks, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Articles 1 to 12? Go on, Senator Joseph, to respond.
Thank you, sir. I will provide the Deputy, because it's a very interesting question, and I must say that when I dealt with the originally solvency requirements in 2013, I probably was more brief than I am now, but I do know that the insolvency issues are, of course, a matter for audited accounts, and there has to be a statement of internal control as a company, and all the basically audit requirements of a company, which must also be adhered to, of course, by a limited liability partnership. They are the one that must effectively make representations and provide a certificate to show that there is a true and fair view of the accounts and that is an ongoing concern. And that's obviously linked ongoing concern and the responsibilities of independent auditors. Of course, professional auditor firm can be sued. Of course, some of them may actually be limited liability partners in future, but they have to have lots of resources in order to deal with claims. And it's really through, as I understand it, the accounting arrangements and the audit requirements that is being met with. I hope that's helpful.
Just a brief supplementary, sir, if I may, clarification.
Yes.
The Minister will be, Mrs. Minister will be well aware that it's illegal to trade what's insolvent as a limited company. Would it be exactly the same for a limited liability partnership?
Yes, sir, and it's also, exactly. What is important perhaps to say is that the solvency statement must be notified to the JFSC, so that is also a further requirement. There is a mechanism for a copy of the solvency statement to be sent to the registrar along with the annual return that's done every year. And should the LLP decide not to make the specified solvency statement in a calendar year, there is, whilst there's no direct penalty that's applicable, there is the inability for the partners to withdraw assets, including a share of profit from the partnership, and that they won't actually be able to realise any of the fruits of their commercial endeavours or whatever they're actually doing with that. So the LFP must be in a position to manage the position with its customers and trade creditors if there is a refusal to sign effectively the not have a specified solvency statement. There will be occasions, I'm told, that when LLP's main role is to hold an asset and there may be no trade creditors, and there is flexibility in the law to deal with all that sort of thing. It's quite a technical area, but yes, I mean, if the Deputy wants his assurance that there is suitable oversight and checks and balances and controls, yes, accountants and the statement actually being made to the JFSC.
All those in favour of adopting Articles 1 to 12, kindly show. Those against? Articles 1 to 12 are adopted. How do you wish to deal with the remainder of the articles?
I think I'll do them all together, sir, if I may. So Part 4 deals with the registration and dissolutions of LLPs, and Article 18 sets out that purpose of registration. 19, that change in registration must be sent within 28 days. All this is quite specified and all set out in detail. 21 ensures a commercial entity and defaults do not affect the validity, so that effectively the partnership can trade. 22 deals with the dissolution of an LP. 23, cancellation of it. 5, Part 5 deals with the miscellaneous provisions, and 24 with the legal proceedings. I'm not going to ask the Attorney General to explain it because I think it's pretty clear in plain English that all of the arrangements are dealing with the matter sort of creditor, or there's provision of whether a judgment creditor or partner of an LLP is entitled to enforce the claim against the partner's interest. Obviously, it's a standalone entity. That's the whole concept of this. 25 sets out the rules relating to service. 27, the function of the registrar of LLP. 28 deal with the provisions of the settling and payment of fees, including the annual fee, which we're going to be looking at generally. 9, requirements of inspection. 30, powers of the Attorney General. 32, standard provisions on legal professional privilege, which is a standard arrangement. Much of this is obviously from LLP laws which are in the Commonwealth and elsewhere. And I don't really think there's anything else that I wish to draw members' particular attention to in the articles which are up to all the remaining articles, including Article 44 and the schedule, sir.
We should move the schedules as well. You didn't actually touch upon Article Part 3. You started at Part 4. Are you taking Articles 13 through to 44 plus the schedules?
Yeah.
Very well. Are those articles plus the schedules seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on those articles plus the schedules? Deputy Lewis.
So if I may, just a question about fees and charges, sir. On page 39, it just seems a little bit confusing. Perhaps I'm reading it wrongly, but it talks about an annual administration fee, and it then says that in addition to any annual administration fee, a limited liability partnership shall pay to the Commission annually such amount as the states determine in the regulations. In other words, suggesting there's two fees. The Minister will be aware that across the world, countries are competing for various types of incorporated bodies because there's fees to be had. And in some cases, for example, Dubai, make a lot of money in registering companies. And in this case, you can register a limited liability partnership. Does the Minister anticipate lots of these being registered? And if so, what sort of fee generation could there be for the states of Jersey? And could he clarify as to what these two fees are? Is there an annual registration fee? And is there another fee as well? And what are those fees likely to be? Or are they set by regulation by the Minister outside this Assembly?
I think you're looking at Article 28.
Thank you. I was just trying to find the page that the Deputy was referring to. So, effectively, the purpose of this, to answer Deputy Lewis, the purpose is to create a split in the annual return to the JFSC and some to effectively the way that money then comes back from the JFSC to the Treasury. Now, that's the whole purpose of actually splitting it. And yes, the amount that is collected by the annual fee, which is paid and remitted to the Treasury, is, as I understand it, the thing that's set by regulations. But I will say to the Deputy and to members that we are looking at the whole issue of fees across the board. And whilst I'm alert and I agree very much with the issue of competitiveness, and we have been loath not to increase fees on a number of corporate entities, it is actually something that I have said to the Treasury Minister and Chief Minister that we are going to review that, because I do think, whilst in no way complacent, and I'm not sending a message at all that we're going to be increasing fees, I think it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are collecting an appropriate fee which can be remitted to states' revenues on the back of what is effectively a growing and a quality kite mark of Jersey entities, and that will be subject to consultation. But I'm reasonably optimistic that with the growth that we're seeing on the back of the financial services industry, more people in work, more business coming to Jersey, and certainly all of this type of legislation and this kind of entity providing important, almost individual. People say that the industry is one industry? Well, it's lots and lots of different aspects for lots and lots of different reasons, as the Deputy says. And we're going to make that right judgment between collecting as much money as we can, but remaining competitive. But I'll brief the Deputy if he's interested in that. Is it matter? Perhaps I can use his hat of the PAC to have a look at those whole fees. And I can tell him that the revenue is not known, but the fee is currently, I'm told, £500 a year.
Well,
So I move the articles.
all those in favour of adopting Articles 13 to 44 plus the schedules, kindly show. Those against? Articles adopted. How do you wish to deal with the matter in third reading?
Quickly, sir, and just by saying that I'm very grateful for members' support. I don't think that in 1997, I thank Deputy Lewis for his questions. I don't think 19 years later from the 1997 LLPs, I wouldn't have thought that an LLP, after the difficulty that had at the time, would actually be going with this Assembly quite as swiftly as it has. But I would also recognise and thank the officials that have worked with this. Actually, this law has been a good example of bringing in what we now do in the Financial Services Unit, of actually bringing people in-house on secondment from law firms, working alongside officials in the Financial Services Unit, which, as the Chairman and his committee said quite kindly, was a tiny unit compared to what they actually do. They work extremely hard, and now we actually try and increase the productivity of that department, which is already very high, with bringing in people from external law firms and actually having working them in the office, which is very good. And I thank all those players who have been part of bringing this important piece of legislation. Another, not massive, but it's all part of the building of effectively a competitive and full-service offering financial services entity. And I thank members for the support.
Is the matter seconded in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition in third reading? All those in favour of the adoption?
Can we have the appeal, sir?
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. Ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of voting, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law has been adopted. 39 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Very well. The next item of public business is the Antarctic Act 2013, extension of sections 14, 15 and 16 to Jersey by order in council, P96, lodged by the Chief Minister, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to signify, pursuant to Article 31 of the States of Jersey Law 2005, whether they agree that a request be made to the Privy Council for the making of an order in council that would extend to Jersey sections 14, 15 and 16 of the Antarctic Act 2013, amending certain sections of the Antarctic Act 1994 that were extended to Jersey by the Antarctic Act 1994 Jersey Order 1995, as summarised in the report of the Chief Minister dated 1st of September 2016.
Chief Minister.
So I'd like to ask Senator Balash to act as rapporteur, please.
Senator.
So members will recall that the States of Jersey Law 2005 contains a provision which requires that any order in council extending to the island the provisions of a United Kingdom Act must first of all be referred to this Assembly so that the Assembly's views may be signified thereon. And this proposition asks the Assembly to agree that the Antarctic Act 2013 should be extended to the island by order in council insofar as sections 14, 15 and 16 are concerned. There are very few places in the world where there has never been war and where the environment is fully protected and where scientific research is a priority, and Antarctica is one of those places. And the 1959 Antarctic Treaty established what the parties to the treaty call a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. and that treaty has been ratified on Jersey's behalf by the United Kingdom. The treaty was reinforced in 1991 by the Protocol on Environmental Protection, and the measures were brought into force in the United Kingdom by the Antarctic Act 1994 and by the Antarctic Regulations 1995, both of which have been extended to Jersey. The legislation in the United Kingdom and extended to Jersey as well by order in council established that various activities require a permit from the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, most notably for British expeditions travelling to Antarctica, British stations sited in Antarctica, British registered vessels and aircraft going to the continent, and other matters as well. The Assembly is being asked today to approve additional protection set out in the Antarctic Act 2013. The report accompanying the proposition sets out in some detail the effect of the three sections in question, but in summary, Section 14 deals with the application of offences to non-nationals because non-UK nationals were not eligible for a permit. There was difficulty in taking non-British nationals who might be scientists accompanying a British expedition on such an expedition because they could not be given a licence. And the various offences under the Act of harming Antarctic fauna and flora and introducing non-native species without a permit did not apply to non-UK nationals. And the extension of this section will now apply those provisions to non-UK nationals. Section 15 of the Act deals with permits in relation to historic sites and monuments and enables a new form of permit in respect of repair or conservation of such historic sites to be issued by the Secretary of State. And Section 16 deals with provisions for the conservation of animals and plants, including extending protection to native invertebrates, limiting animals on board vessels going to Antarctica to recognized assistance dogs, clarifying certain provisions concerning the introduction of microscopic organisms and non-sterile soil into the Antarctic environment, and the protection of indigenous species and species which migrate to the Antarctica. The provisions of the Antarctic Act 2013 seem to the Chief Minister to be appropriate for Jersey to incorporate into Jersey law by means of the extending order in council, and I accordingly move the proposition.
Proposition seconded.
Yes.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Senator Rosen.
Sir, I wonder if the External Relations Minister could say whether or not he thinks that actually the land that we are referring to includes the Queen Elizabeth land, and would he share with me, if that is the case, my joy that I saw yesterday all of the flags of the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies, including Queen Elizabeth land, flying in Parliament Square yesterday.
Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Call on Senator Bowles to respond.
So that I'm very grateful for the Senator's intervention, and I share his joy about the flags. On the legal question, I think I shall defer to the Attorney General.
Was there a legal question? I'm not sure if I if there was, I didn't hear it.
Whether or not the law extends to the Queen Elizabeth Land.
Oh, well, that's a very interesting point about the sovereignty of Antarctica, which I think is effectively frozen aspect pursuant to 1961 international treaty. But of course, there are British claims to a significant portion of Antarctica, and the British Antarctic Territory is, of course, an overseas territory in its own right, with the flag that has been mentioned by the Senator.
Well, you maintain the proposition. Those members in favour of adopting the proposition, kindly show. Those against? Very well, the proposition is adopted. The next item is public elections, polling cards and accessibility of polling stations, P97, lodged by Deputy Mezek. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, that each registered voter should be issued a polling card in advance of an election, B, that voters should be able to vote at any polling station, C, that the location of polling stations should be reviewed by the Privileges and Procedures Committee to ensure that the polling stations are at the most convenient locations within each constituency, and to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to bring forward the necessary legislative amendments to implement these changes in time for the May 2018 general election.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir, and I'm not going to speak for too long on this proposition because I think that each part of it is relatively simple, and I'm sure that members will have their opinions on it. And if any member wishes any particular part of it to be taken separately, then I'm more than happy to offer to do that as well. As members will see, that I lodged this not too long after the recent senatorial by-election because I'd had a bit of time at that point to reflect on that process and think about a lot of the things that had happened actually on election day and consider in an island-wide election what could be done to make the process a bit easier for people. And I know and accept that Jersey has real problems with our democratic process. We obviously discussed earlier reforming our voting system, and we're going to be discussing probably for a few more years now reforming our electoral system as well, and there's other elements to those debates which I think are really at the core of why we have such high levels of voter abstention in Jersey. But I don't think that that means we can't make small amendments that should hopefully be relatively uncontroversial, that just make that process a bit easier on the day for those people who do want to vote. And I found that when I was speaking to people during that by-election campaign, I spoke to a lot of people who had either never voted before or who had voted but not for many, many years. And I think that those of us who are involved in politics, whether it's as politicians ourselves or we'll have people we know outside who are very interested and pay attention, I think we probably take for granted that system compared to people who just aren't political, but who every few years when it comes to an election might want to think about paying attention and getting involved in casting their vote. You know, all of us in this room, we know where our local polling station is, we know how to vote, we know how to register to vote. It's just one of those things that because we're political people, we know about. But the vast majority of ordinary people have a lot more important things going on in their day-to-day lives that they're just often not aware of the things that we might just instinctively know. One of those being whether or not you're actually registered to vote. And I was having this conversation with Deputy Tadyer the other day, is that whenever an election comes up, I actually get a little bit paranoid that I might have accidentally fallen off the electoral register, simply because I can usually not remember when the last time I actually put the form in was. And many people will be the same, and we know that the States is making progress to make it easier to register to vote by the fact people will be able to vote, to register to vote online soon, which will make that easier. But I thought about this and I realised I never had this problem when I was living in the UK, where I lived for 4 years and where I voted in one form of election or another every year, whether it was a parliamentary election, a London Assembly election, or a local council election, where in advance of that election, we were sent a polling card to every household, every person who was registered to vote, which said, you are registered to vote, this is where your polling station is, and this is what the election is. If you want any more information, this is the website you go to. So there was absolutely no ambiguity. I knew that I could vote, I knew where to vote, especially when I was moving around a lot when I was in the UK, so I didn't necessarily know where the polling station usually was, whereas you know, if you've lived in Jersey for a long time, you might instinctively know where your local polling station was. And that process made it much easier. And when I did a bit of research, I discovered that Jersey is actually one of the very few jurisdictions that doesn't issue polling cards in advance of an election. And in fact, in the UK, they've been issuing them officially since 1948, when they passed the Representation of the People's Act, and since the 1970s, they've been issuing them even for local authority elections, not just national parliamentary elections. And so I thought that that, as a small thing we could do, would potentially make it much easier for those people who, when an election becomes imminent, which is when they may start paying attention, as opposed to months before when they should have been registered, you only really get interested when it's imminent, those people would know for definite whether or not they can vote. Because on the actual day of the recent by-election, I spent a huge amount of time with my phone buzzing in my pocket because I was getting a text message or a call or a Facebook message or something from somebody who I'd never heard of, somebody who I didn't know, but who realised it was election day that day. They wanted to come out and vote, but they didn't know if they were registered and they didn't know where their polling station was. And I was lucky that I had somebody on standby who I could say, right, can you quickly check for me that this person is registered, and I'll let them know. And a large number of those people were registered, and I could say, yep, sure, you are registered, and this is the polling station you go to. So brilliant, those people could go to vote. Some of them were disappointed because they'd missed the deadline. They simply didn't know when it was, and were not going to be able to go out to vote because of that. But I couldn't help but think how many people were there who were sat at home who suddenly realised it was election day but didn't have the initiative to get in touch with the candidates who actually asked. There's probably quite a few of those people who I could have never reached because I would have required them to have got in touch with me, whereas if you've got a polling card, there's no debate about it. You know that you are eligible to vote, you know that you can go out and do it, so there's no debate there. As in other jurisdictions, you wouldn't need to bring your polling card with you to the polling station to vote. It wouldn't be a requirement. But if you did bring it, it'd be easier to find you on the electoral roll so you could get in and out a little bit quicker, which could be convenient if it was busy. And at the back of my proposition, I've attached as an appendix a copy of a polling card that was used in the recent Isle of Man general election, which, looking at it, it looks, I think, virtually identical to the ones that I used to receive when I was a voter in the UK as well. So that just says, this is the polling district you're in, this is the day the election is, and this is where your polling station is. And they've obviously covered their name and address, but that will confirm exactly who it is who is eligible to vote there. So I think that is something that would have the benefit of informing those people that they can vote, but in a household where there are many people living there, but perhaps only one or two of them have actually filled in the voter registration form, and maybe some of the kids aren't registered to vote, or maybe one of the partners is eligible to vote but hasn't signed up. When the other people in the household receive their polling card, there may well at that point still be time for them to get on the supplementary register at that point, so it could serve as a reminder for them as well. I accept that it may cost a very, very small amount of money. The card doesn't need to be in colour, doesn't need to be some posh, expensive thing, and we are automatically sending things out to every household in the run-up to an election anyway, so I think the cost would be negligible, and it is something that's done in jurisdictions all over the world. So that's part A. I hope that's relatively uncontroversial. Part B, which is that voters should be able to vote at any polling station. Now, there might be some discussion here in that there are some practicalities you would have to get over, because making sure that it's impossible for somebody to go to one polling station, vote, and then quickly run down the road to another polling station to vote again is something that, of course, we must absolutely not allow to happen. But Guernsey does this. In their constituencies, many of them have more than one polling station, and they have a system in place that allows that to happen as it stands. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know exactly what their system is. But thinking about it purely theoretically, I can't see why in this modern age it would be too difficult to come up with some sort of interactive system where when somebody comes to vote, you cross their name off and that can be updated in real time at the system in operation at every other polling station. I can't see how that would be particularly difficult to do. I have had conversations with Deputy Wickenden, the Assistant Minister with responsibility for this area, who assures me that not only is it something that's perfectly possible to do, it's something they are looking at as it stands already. So that's good, but I would hope that we'd want to give the backing not only to the Assistant Minister who wants to get on with that already, but also to the Privileges and Procedures Committee, which has the responsibility for looking over elections anyway, just to say that yes, that is something in principle we'd want to see. And I've used in the proposition just a couple of examples to illustrate why our current situation can be a bit strange. So take my constituency, for example, where residents of Hugh Court would have to go to Springfield Stadium to vote, when they actually live just a few metres away from the town hall, St Helier No. 1's polling station, which they live closer to than virtually everybody in St Helier No. 1 actually does. So to allow those people to vote at whichever polling station is most convenient, I think as long as we can come up with a secure way of doing it, which I'm assured is relatively easy to do, you just need to put the effort in and make sure it gets done, then I would hope that that would be something that the Assembly could support on the principle of making it easier for people to vote. And the last part of the proposition, Part C, is to ask us to simply consider whether the polling stations we have already are in the best locations and whether we need to think about, in some instances, moving them to places that are more convenient. In the UK, for example, many polling stations are at the local primary school because a large amount of the population is going there anyway because they're dropping their kids off in the morning or picking them up, so they can simply do that whilst they're there. And I think there's a couple of peculiarities in the system we have at the moment where there are examples, I think, of polling stations not being in the most convenient location. And I think, for me, the obvious one, which I point out in this proposition, is St Clement, where you have a parish with a very large population. The most dense part of it is the people who are living there who might be going into town to work will not be passing the polling station at any part of the day. They'd have to go out of their way to get there. Many of these people won't be driving, they'll be walking or getting the bus, and so it's a bit out the way to get there. Whereas if you had a polling station at, for example, Samaray Primary School or the Good Companions Club, you would be right in that centre with hundreds and hundreds of people around who could very easily vote in a much more convenient way than is currently the case. But then that raises the question, well, why just have one polling station there? Because there are people who would be better off if it was still at the parish hall for the people who live around that area. So I'm saying let's have a look at this and decide that if within constituencies that have large numbers of voters, we should have more than one. So St Clement, with a population of, I think it's around 9,000 people, has one polling station, contrasting with St Mary, which has, I think it's about 1,800 people, also just has one polling station. So I think it makes sense to say that some constituencies should have more than one and that we should look at having them in the most convenient locations. In some parishes, I think there's no doubt that where the polling station currently is the most convenient location, and there probably won't be a more convenient location you can think of. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is St John, where their parish hall is right in between the primary school and the local pub. where else is there going to be a better place to have your polling station there, apart from maybe actually in the pub, but that might cause some difficulties. But then it would also offer us the opportunity to maybe on election day have a polling station in the Royal Square, where a lot of people are going past anyway. People could pop in on their lunch break. I know we've also got St Paul's Centre at the moment, but why not? Why not have another one somewhere else as well, just to make it easier? I don't think there's a huge amount else to say other than that. These are just, I think, reasonably minor practical suggestions that I think would make voting easier. It doesn't get to the real root of the problem, which is that we have much deeper problems with our democratic system that we need to be sorting out. But why not make these minor amendments if there's even the slightest chance they could make voting a little bit easier and more convenient for people? And so I make the proposition.
Proposition seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy McClenton.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I must congratulate Deputy Mezek for bringing this proposition forward. Excellent. Anything that makes it easier to remind yourself if you've actually registered to vote, so the polling card, a great idea. Location, definitely some of the polling stations are in strange places with no parking whatsoever, making it inordinately difficult to pull up and vote. Part B, the voter should be able to vote at any polling station. I'm fairly sure that this is in train. I'm pretty sure that this is actually a process that is happening right now. So we may be being asked, in part, to vote for something which is already happening. And I'm hoping at some point that Deputy Wickenden, who's apparently the Dean now, will be able to clear that up. So, well done, by the way. Good work. So I've just got a few questions based around whether or not we're about to vote for something that actually is in train, if that could be cleared up. Please, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm having some difficulty with this because actually I agree with the principle. I think the principle is very well made, Deputy Mezek. Sorry, to the Chair, to Deputy Mezek. The idea of polling cards that actually advises people where to go and when the polling station is open is a very good initiative, because there's not many people nowadays that actually get the Evening Post and would look it up in there, although they would pick it up off the general news. But something that actually gave them the direction, particularly in multi-constituency parishes or voting districts in parishes, that extra information would be very useful to them. But I start to wonder when I read through the proposition, are there any potential downfalls with a polling card in itself? For example, if it says John Refo, your polling station at St Peter's Parish Hall, and this is your polling number on the state, that's fine. But when I go there, if it's a simple card, how do they know that I'm John Refo and I'm carrying his card to go and do that vote? So we start to look. So we start to look about bringing another ID, but then there's nothing to stop me with my ID going around with different cards to different people. And I think there's some issues there about security in the voting, in getting that voting done, if we're just going to use a very simple method. And when it comes down to polling stations, again, in themselves, do we really need privileges and procedures to look at where polling stations are if you can go to anyone, which is a convenient one? If you do happen to live just across the border from the one which is not in your district and you can vote there, do we need to move the polling stations? I don't think so. I think for me, this proposition is well meant and deserves a good hearing, but it doesn't meet, in my view, in the very short time frame we've got to 2018, getting through legislation. I think that we might rush to the end and miss a lot of bits in the middle in getting it right. That is my concern, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I must also commend Deputy Mezek for bringing this forward. I am, however, a little bit concerned that why is PPC not bringing such suggestions forward, sir? I saw the light on of the constables. Perhaps he could mention it when he speaks, because this is exactly the sort of thing I would have thought when we're reviewing the whole electoral process, of which this is just one of many aspects of it. PPC should be perhaps the body that's bringing forward these recommendations. In the elections, I think 2006, in St John's, I did my own polling card, sir, and put it out the day before polling day to every single address. That was much easier with, I think it's 1,500 addresses in St John's, maybe 2,000 at the most. When it came to campaigning in District 3 and 4, so there was 8,000 people, so slightly more difficult. So to put 2 items out, I would have probably exceeded my budget allowance that I'm supposed to spend on an election. So having this done from the centre, perhaps, I think is an excellent idea. Because I was asked on numerous occasions where to vote. Those that had voted before, they were fine, that they understood where they had to vote. But even those that had voted before, which was 3 years previously, had forgotten where they had to vote. And there seemed to be some confusion, particularly where they were quite close to a polling station that they knew was a polling station, i.e. the town hall, yet they had to vote at Rouge-Brillion School. So it's quite confusing for some constituents as to where they should vote. So any additional information like this is direct to them, identified to them with perhaps their number on it, if that was allowed through data protection. The Constable of St Peter said this would be difficult to match up at the polling booth itself and open to electoral fraud. Well, I would have thought that if you've got ID, which I believe the Conotabs officials at the parish hall demand when you check in to vote, therefore you should be able to quite clearly identify the recipient of the card against their ID at the polling station. So I wouldn't have thought that was an issue at all. But like I say, there is confusion out there already as to which polling station to go to, particularly if you haven't voted before. I think many of us in the last election successfully persuaded people that had never voted before to vote, but then we had to explain where to go to vote. And we shouldn't have to do that. It should be much clearer, and if they could vote anywhere, that would be great. And I understand, I'll be interested to know the facts from the greffier or from the Chairman of Privileges and Procedures as to just how successful the advanced polling station at St Paul's has been. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I think it's an excellent initiative. And I would like to know more as to how successful that is. And clearly, if that's worked, there should be no reason why this can't be rolled out in the manner that Deputy Mezek is suggesting. So I wholeheartedly endorse and support this proposition, but just curious as to know why it wasn't brought before us by PPC. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I can tell Deputy Lewis, explain to Deputy Lewis why PPC haven't brought forward this proposition, because 2 of the 3 requests in the proposition are already covered in the public elections law, as I shall explain in a moment, and the 3rd one, as Deputy McClinton said, is already in train. Now, sir, Deputy Mezek is a member of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I hope he won't mind me saying that I find him a very valuable member of that committee. So I think it's a pity that he's chosen not to raise these issues at committee, but rather come straight to the States with this proposition. Now, I say it's a pity because each of the suggestions in the proposition has merit. In fact, they all have significant merit. But sadly, the wording of the proposition and the report attached to the proposition raises more questions than it answers. Taking each in turn, sir. Firstly, the Deputy suggests that each registered voter should be issued with a polling card in advance of the election. That is welcome and sensible. But the Deputy does not say whether this is in addition to the notice to be sent by the parishes to each voter in general election year under Article 7A of the Public Elections Law. Now, that was an article this House this Assembly put into the law after the last election, or became effective after the last election, so it's never actually been used yet. But what the Deputy was saying, he was concerned, quite understandably, that people didn't know whether they were on the electoral list or not, unless they got a polling card. They will know when they get this notice under Article 7A, which will give them all the information they need. It's not called a polling card, it's called a notice, but that's already in the Public Elections Law under Article 7A. So it does seem to me that this, then doing a polling card on top of that, seems to be a duplication of effort and expenditure. So, but the Deputy in his proposition does not say if this card is to be sent out in the event of by-elections. Presumably it is. Does it also include elections for centennier and procureur, which also come under the Public Elections Law? Presumably so. But the proposition doesn't actually mention the public elections or the Public Elections Law. It merely mentions elections. So will it have to include elections for vanteniers, constables' officers, roads committee members, members of the rates assessment committees, roads inspectors? I assume not. But the proposition is certainly unclear. And in his report, sir, the Deputy calls the cost of these polling cards, and he said it again, a drop in the ocean. There are currently, sir, more than 64,000 registered voters. Each will have a card posted to them, so the cost will be somewhere in the region of £100,000 each time the cards are sent to every voter. When you take into account cost of postage, envelopes, because presumably they're not going to be sent out without envelopes, so everybody can see who lives at what address and so on. And of course, staff time. I really do not call that a drop in the ocean. And the deputy need not worry about, if he doesn't return his electoral form every year, he needn't worry that he's going to just drop off. Because under the public elections law, after 3 years, if one hasn't sent in his election form, his electoral form, then the constable has to write to that person to advise them they're going to be removed if they don't respond. So every effort is made by the public elections law and by the parish halls to make sure that people aren't taken off the electoral list until every effort has been made to notify them. So the deputy also asked that voters should be able to vote at any polling station. That is an excellent idea and something we are working towards. We all want to make it easier for people to vote. But until voters are checked off the electoral list as they vote electronically, this would be a recipe for disaster. When we have the electronic list, fine. But until that, I really think there's a recipe for chaos. Now, it may actually work in an island-wide election or referendum, where the same candidates and the same question are voted on at each polling station. When, for example, a St Clemente presents himself at St Juan, it will be perfectly possible for the authorisé at St Juan to phone St Clement, check the validity of the voter's credentials, and that these are not already voted, issue the senatorial and referendum ballot paper, which that with St Juan will hold exactly the same ballot papers that are held at the other polling stations. And then St Clement's authorisé can cross him off the list. Job done. But when voting for deputies or constables, it will be necessary for every polling station to hold voting slips from every other polling station and then have some mechanism for them to be distributed after the polls close from every polling station to possibly every other polling station. And there are usually about 17 of these. So I suggest we may not quite be ready for this and will cause chaos until the electronic system is in place. Finally, sir, the location of polling stations. I mean, I understand what Deputy Mezek is saying about that, but wherever you put a polling station, it's going to be, if you move one, it's going to be more convenient for others, less convenient for others. That's the nature of things. But there's already a mechanism for this under Article 26 of the Public Elections Law. An excerpt from it. The electoral administrator for the parish where the poll is held shall provide one or more polling stations in such a way that the authorisé is satisfied that all persons have reasonable facilities for the exercise of their right to vote. So what the deputy wants already exists under the law. And I don't think it should be the role of PPC, a political body, to substitute its opinion for that of the independent authorisé. So, as I said, all of these suggestions have merit, considerable merit, significant merit, but as always, associated problems. And if the states approve this proposition, PPC will have to implement them despite all the problems, or some of the problems, which I hope I've identified. Better, I suggest, would be for the proposition to be withdrawn or rejected by the states, and the deputy bring these matters to the committee on which he sits for proper and mature consideration. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Rickenham.
Thank you, sir. And I think we all stand here with Deputy Mezek because we are all concerned about the voter apathy that we see in Jersey. We all want to increase the amount of voter participation in this island. And I think that he's coming up with some very pragmatic ways that we can approach that, which is let's put the polling stations where the people are rather than ask the people to come to the polling stations. And I think we can all agree, as the Connotab just said there, that these are all very, very sensible propositions about how we can achieve those kind of things. Before the Deputy lodged his proposition, he very kindly contacted me first to get my views on what I thought about this on a digital level, on is it possible and what's there. And I did inform the Deputy that this work is already underway, which he has mentioned within his proposition. But it did shock me that the fact that I had said that we are already speaking with the law officers, we are already speaking with all the relevant people to get this piece of work to happen, still meant that the proposition was lodged. But I do thank the Deputy for supporting my team, the eGov team, in the work they're doing towards this very fact. We are looking at this, and the Deputy in his report rightfully says that it has to be electronic. The way that we currently do our polling, our electoral roll format now, would not allow us to do what the Deputy is asking us for. So that work is happening. There are two streams. There's the core eGov stream that's going to happen, that is looking at the wider picture for our digital democracy and the way that we deal and work with our constituents and residents of Jersey in a digital format from government. But there's also a piece to try and get something in place that will allow us to use the data we currently have at the next elections. And that's something that I really am passionate about, making sure that we have this electoral roll in a digital format in a way that when you cross it off in one place, it crosses off the other. There are challenges, as the Connoisseur said, about in deputy positions, making sure that they've got the correct polling card, that it's marked for their parish or their district. There could be a way of printing it off. I'm not going to solutionise it right here and now. But then after that, I think the Connoisseur was rightfully saying is, how do you get those votes in time to the polling station that's doing the counting for that district, so they can all be counted in one place? So I think there are some challenges around here. I think the Connoisseur was absolutely right in what he was saying about the challenges there. Obviously, the polling cards, again, people are told about this in the election law, but is there a way of making it even clearer that the Deputy has mentioned his proposition? Possibly there is. Is the cost right? Well, I think we'd have to look at that. But in there it says, I think this is, it should be last on the one, because if we can get polling stations anywhere and you can vote anywhere, the polling card itself doesn't need to say where you can vote. It just says go to a polling station. I'd like to say this work is happening. We are looking at making this happen for the next elections. The conversation has been going on for 6 months, actually, in different areas to make sure that we're in the right place for it by the next elections. So I thank very much the Deputy in supporting the work that my team's doing towards making this happen, and thank you very much.
Deputy David?
Thank you, sir. I pressed my button after the Councillor of St Peter spoke, because I just wanted to say that the idea that you can poll at any polling station cannot do any harm whatsoever to elections in this island, because we will get more people voting. And I'd like to think I'm a moderniser and progressive, but I do have a slight niggle about a voting app where I can vote for my candidates on my tablet or my phone, or even at home with a few mates around having a pizza and a few beers. Let's see who we're going to vote for. I have a slight worry about that. Whilst it is good to make it convenient and more people would vote, I think there has to be some effort on the part of people going to vote. They have to have thought about it, make the effort, and make an informed choice. So I've got a problem with electronic voting, but helping people go to a polling station can only do good. It was interesting at the last, I think after the last by-election, there was a little one of the media, I can't remember who it was, I can't remember who it was. One of the media did a little poll about what, because the turnout was low, what put you off voting the most. And actually, the thing that put people off voting the most was not being able to park. Was not being able to park. Now, a lot of the parish halls, that's not a problem. Parking is not a problem. And if you work in town, the town hall, I guess, it's not a problem if you're already there. Although, if you're at the other end of town, it is. And I agree with Deputy Mezek. Why not a polling station in the Royal Square? For my 25 years in the UK, when I went to vote in a general election, a porter cabin arrived in the churchyard of the church at the end of my road in Turnham Green in Chiswick, so that I didn't have to go all the way to Hounslow, miles away, and I wouldn't have bothered, and I can vote there. And then, the day after the election, the porter cabin disappeared. And if we look, things are changing, conurbations are changing and growing. Look at Goree, between bits of Grouville and bits of St Martin's. Wouldn't it be good to have a polling station in Goree, and not tucked away somewhere, but slap it in a porter cabin outside the Dolphin Hotel or what have you, know where I mean? And then there's a whole swathe of St Martin's that could vote in that polling station, and Grouville, and anybody else for that matter. And the one great thing about voting in a polling station that is not in your parish is that you don't have to run the gamut of all those candidates standing there with their supporters and their rosettes intimidating you. So I feel this can only be good. This is one thing we can do to reach out to the electorate, to do something about the voting figures that we're all disappointed about. This is one concrete thing that we should do. And I hope it doesn't have to wait to the full digitalisation of voting. Of course, the constables are far more experienced in this than me, and of course there are headaches involved. But by May 2018, we should try our hardest, even if it's not full digitalisation, we should try our hardest to get people to be able to vote in any polling station, and there should be more polling stations. Put one at B&Q where people can park, etc., out of town. So I don't know. I don't want to upset PPC, or I don't care whether this is. I know that Deputy Wickendon's already got this in hand. It's a good initiative from Deputy Mezek too. Whatever happens, we should resolve, whatever the difficulties are, to do this, to get people voting in any polling station and increasing the polling stations and thinking radically, put them in Marks and Spencer's, put them at B&Q, put them at Goree, what have you, and that we could do, that might have a significant effect on our voting figures.
Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'll be brief after following that great speech from Deputy Lavey, and I feel a lot like him. But I think, sir, I went out at lunchtime, came back to a parallel universe. I mean, this morning we had Deputy Tadia producing something that hadn't gone through PPC, but been amended by PPC, but then couldn't even be accepted by the House. This afternoon, we've got something that's supposedly in train. Let me state for the record, sir, I am on PPC. We haven't produced any comments. We do not disallow Deputy Mezek to bring his own proposition just because he's on there. Like we don't, we allow Senator Roseff to agree with comments and then vote and talk against them in the House. It's absolutely fine, sir, but not in the universe that I'm living in. This is all about letting people vote. We have pre-poll. We've been doing that for the last 2 elections. I go and I've pre-polled. I don't stand in my own district, so I pre-poll. Always, since it's been there, I pre-poll. Never could I go back to the parish, which was St Saviour then and now St Clement's now, and then vote again. It's there, the technology is there. I really respect Deputy Wickendon, who's now Assistant Minister, and he's moving things forward. If he had seen this, he should be biting the hand off of Deputy Mezek, because if, as you heard earlier, it hasn't been proposed or decided by the states, there hasn't been consultation, you ain't getting it before 2018. He's very sure it's happening. Today, you need to put your weight behind this. Make it easier. Why would we try not to let people have polling cards? It doesn't inscribe as a deputy, which was very, very, to me, picky for the Constable of St Clement's, the Privilege and Procedures chairman, because he's never like that. It says that after A, B and C to request PPC to bring in laws. It doesn't prescribe exactly how it's going to be. And of course, if you're going to do one, if you can vote anywhere, why would you put which polling station on your card? PPC are not morons, sir. We do have some common sense. And if you direct us, but I'm not sure which way I'm going to be directed, because as I say, this morning, I was fully supportive of comments that we as a PPC had put, and we were supportive of going out of consultation, got outvoted, sir. Today, unfortunately, Deputy Mezek is a member of PPC and he didn't come and discuss it round the table. Well, where's the PPC comments? I don't even remember it being discussed, I'm sorry. And I'm hearing behind me, where's the amendment? We're getting some very small and petty arguments in this. Both the debates on making this better, easier for the public to vote for you or someone else, and it might be someone else. Keep on voting against the public to be having their vote the easiest way they can possibly do, and it will be someone else, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Sutton.
Thank you, sir. And let's take a little bit of the heat out of the argument, because we're certainly getting something in a twist here. And we're apparently appearing very precious about this. Let's have a look at what the proposition says. It says, the states are asked to decide whether they are of the opinion. Are we of the opinion that we should issue a polling card to improve turnout? That voters should be able to vote at any polling station? In principle, yes, we are, perhaps. At the location of polling stations should be reviewed by the PPC. And that, are we of the opinion to request, notice the politeness in there, request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to bring forward the necessary legislative amendments to implement these changes in time for the May 2018 general election. Now, if I took that proposition out to members of the public, they would be amazed that we've already spent, whatever it is, 35 minutes debating it. They would look at that and say, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? How come, what would your objection be? Well, your objection would be, apparently, that anybody could go along with a polling card, of course, unless your rules say, and it should be on the polling card, that you bring your ID with you. Well, that would help, and it's a simple instruction. Doesn't have to be in colour, doesn't have to be any more expensive. Simples. That's doable. So for the Constable of St. Peter, that is clearly and plainly doable. And as some people have mentioned, the automatic one vote, as soon as you voted on a pre-poll, off you come off the register. It's electronic, it's easy to do, it happens. So we're already there in terms of, can you vote at a second place? Yes, you can if you pre-poll, and I was pre-poll, because I'm like Deputy Martin, I don't represent the district I live in. And then we come down to, are we assisting people to actually achieve their vote? And the answer has to be yes. Now, I don't know when last Constable of St. Clement last went round his constituency and knocked on doors. But I still do it after 14 years. It's a lot harder than it used to be, I tell you. I go around and knock on doors. And in the run-up to an election, I'm trying to encourage people to vote. And the first question I ask is, are you registered to vote? And the answer is, inevitably, I don't know. So the question is, did you vote at the last election? Yes, I did. Well, you're probably registered to vote then. Have you filled in the form that looks like this in the last 3 years? Can't remember. In that case, you might not be on the register, because every 3 years we clean the register and we send you a note, and if you haven't paid attention to it, you may not be on the electoral roll. Now, last time I did a real good thorough knock-up around one of, I think it was Caesarea Court, up and down, I found that in my district, a third of the people were registered, a third of the people weren't, and a third of the people were living somewhere else. It's the rule of thirds in St Helier number 2 district, and that's pretty standard. So the question is, Are you registered to vote? In significant numbers of occasions, members say, I don't know. And unless somebody's there to do that, but if you've got, have you received this polling card? Yes, it came last week. No, I haven't seen none of those. Okay, let's get you registered. Or you are registered to vote. The polling card is a little step which significantly could change turnout. And really, I think given that we are asking PPC to go and do the work to make sure it happens, and the simple request is there, then if there are problems, if we're talking about the Procurator de Public Bien as well, if we're talking about by-elections, then by all means, what's PPC there for except to mend this, to make it straight? I mean, I was asking, where are the comments? Where's the amendment? This isn't good enough. Where's the amendment? And 9 out of 10, that's what we should do. Good initiative, which deserves support, and out there amongst the voting public would get it almost instantaneously. Get on with it, please, they'd be saying. I want to vote next time.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Conatap St Helier.
Thank you, sir. People sometimes ask me if I support party politics, and this afternoon's debate reminds me of one of the answers I give people when I say that one of the weaknesses of our system is that it's a little broken when it comes to submitting questions. You don't know what questions are being put in by other members, so some days on a Tuesday, a minister's going to have to answer the same question 5 times. And equally with regard to private members' propositions, you don't know what other members are working on. And so you may be working away late into the night on a proposition which another member manages to get across the wire before you. I was reminded of that earlier when Senator Ossoff was proposing the LLP law, because the first proposition I worked on some 20 years ago was to readmit a member who'd been expelled from the States. And I was told when I took it down to the Gref that another member had already put in a motion before me to censure the member that had been expelled from the States, and therefore my proposition was no longer valid. The point I'm trying to make, sir, is that if a committee is already working on electoral reform, in this case, for example, polling cards and multiple polling stations and the like, if a private member then puts in a proposition to try and achieve the same thing or something similar to it, it leaves the Assembly in a rather difficult position. We don't want to vote against these principles. But one might argue one's already approved them, so why would one vote against them? But it does seem, to some extent, to be rather a waste of the Assembly's time to have a debate on something that has already been approved, where the work is already being done by a committee. The fact that the member who's brought the private member's bill is on that committee makes it a little more bizarre, but it doesn't remove the need for some kind of party discipline. And I think that's why there are aspects of party politics that appeal to me, because if one belonged to a party, and I understand, of course, the member does, but the rest of us don't, or most of us don't, if the rest of us were in the other party, we would already know that PPC were working on these matters, and this matter probably wouldn't have got as far as being approved for lodging. So I think we do have a problem, and that's something I'd like PPC to look into, actually, in terms of questions, in terms of private members' bills, which are a precious tool in the backbencher's armoury, and I'm not trying to take it away, but I don't think it helps that ability to bring private members' propositions when they're brought, if you like, duplicating work that has already been done. So how to vote on a matter that is already being dealt with? Well, who knows? Perhaps the best thing is to abstain. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Bree.
Thank you very much, sir. It's quite interesting listening to the various comments made during this debate. As a member of PPC, I have to say I'm not aware that PPC is working on these areas. PPC is there to facilitate things. We are looking at, obviously, the question of electoral reform in the sense of voter representation and equality, but I must admit I'm not aware that we are working on the actual reform of the voting system itself. However, put that one to one side. there is some merit in what this proposition is trying to achieve. There are a lot of questions about it. How's it going to work? Will it work? How on earth are you going to get an electronic voting system that's secure, robust, communicates well with central servers, in place in time for anybody to go into any polling station and effectively use an electronic terminal which will not only register their vote, but register the fact they have voted in the election that they are entitled to vote in. So there are a lot of questions. But that doesn't mean we should dismiss it. It doesn't mean we should say, oh, it's too complicated to even think about, so let's not vote for it. It may well be that if you look at this proposition, it is saying we need to encourage more people to engage in the political system of this island. We have a terrible voter turnout. We are responsible for trying to find ways in which to encourage more people to vote. Perhaps some of these will not work. But this proposition is not saying this is what we are going to do. This proposition is saying PPC to look at it to try and implement these changes. It may well be that PPC come back with their own proposition saying there are problems, it's not going to work, we most certainly can't get it in time for the 2018 elections. But that isn't, in my opinion, sir, that is not the point behind this proposition. The proposition is a very laudable one, which is saying we have to look at ways to get more people engaged and voting. I quite agree with the comment about the polling stations in St Clements. As one of the deputies in St Clements, it is something that has concerned me greatly. If the only thing we get out of this proposition is that St Clements end up with 2 polling stations, one at the parish hall and one at, for example, the Good Companions Club, then to me it has been a great success. So I would hope that most members in this assembly can see past the problems and look at the opportunities instead. And I would urge people to vote in favour of it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Taddy.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to follow the previous speaker. But not to want to be outdone by Deputy Labby, I think there are some other options for polling stations throughout the island. We've got the Treehouse, the Sugar Reef, La Poulante. We've got the Beau Rivage, St Brelade Social Club, and my mate Andy's Bicycle Workshop, which is in Lekeneve Precinct in between the Freedom Surf Shop and Miller's Bar. I'm not sure if I've missed any, so there's just a few options there. Joking aside, though, I mean, the comments that have been made about St Clement and the Good Companions Club, we can relate to, of course, in St Brelade's, which is now, I think, a roughly comparable population to St Clement, even though St Clement has a democratic underrepresentation in that very densely packed parish, which is becoming even more urbanised. Thankfully, we still have a lot of green open space in St Brelade. We, of course, have 2 districts, and therefore we have 2 polling stations, and I think probably, by and large, it works well in our parish in the sense that the parish hall is situated in the nub of the village of St Albans, and that communique is situated in the very densely populated area of Lekeneve with Don Farm, Bellevue, and the other estates around it. So I think we know that it works quite well in our districts. Even though some people need to come by car, many can actually just walk to the polling stations, and certainly I think there's merit where possible, because of course it ties in with the transport policy. We want people to walk, but of course, especially when it's rainy weather, people are much more likely to come out if the polling stations are well situated. So I think that one should be, as we've heard before, a no-brainer, although it's surprising how many no-brain propositions seem to not get through this assembly. The way I see it, and it's interesting that we've had another member of PPC confirm that he's not sure that actually this work is being done. I look at it slightly differently to say that some people say if the work is being done already, why do we need to have a vote on it today to agree to it? But actually, if we don't want PPC to carry out this work, we need to tell them so that they can stop doing that work and concentrate on other areas. The proposition is quite clear. Like all propositions that come to the Assembly, we are asked both collectively and individually whether we are of the opinion that we think A, B and C are good ideas. So if we think that A, registered voters should be issued a polling card, then we should vote for Part A. If we think that actually voters should be able to vote at any polling station, we should vote for Part B. And if we think that the location of polling stations should be reviewed by Privileges and Procedures, then we should, of course, vote for Part C. But if we don't want any of that to happen, we need to let Privileges and Procedures know now so they can stop working on it. Conversely, if we think that all of those ideas are a good thing, then Deputy Mezek's work cannot be seen to be duplicating what they're already doing. It's simply an affirmation if some of the work is going on already, and that remains to be determined. There's still an if over whether that work is actually being done or in the format that it's been suggested. And of course, the other if is whether or not it can be done for the 2018 elections. It may well be, and I know from my time on PPC that, of course, any one time they're constantly looking at different areas that relate to electoral law, as well as the other many roles that they have to keep under review at any one time. But if as an Assembly we think that all of these are positive steps, and if we would like those, wherever possible, to be implemented in time for the May 2018 general elections, then we simply have to support that proposal. Now, it doesn't mean that we know exactly how any one of those three will be implemented, but that's, of course, where the Privileges and Procedures Committee can focus their work and put meat on the bones. Now, just a couple of suggestions. It could well be, and it has been suggested, that, of course, it would be much easier for voters to be able to vote at any polling station with some degree of electronic, digital backup for that. It would absolutely be necessary for at least to have an intranet system between all of the polling stations so that in real time you know who has voted and who hasn't voted so that we don't get a duplication of voting. That, of course, goes without saying, and I think that's well within the current technology that exists. It also stands to reason that in the future we may want to consider having electronic voting machines alongside the traditional methods of casting a vote. But I do take on board the comments that have been said, well, what about the practical elements of the ballot papers? You know, would we have to have ballot papers for all of the deputies and all of the constables in every polling station? Well, that depends on the method that's chosen, of course. If you have an integrated system, computer linked up to a printer with the correct type of paper, you can, of course, just print a ballot paper securely on demand. So actually, you don't need to have all these excess ballot papers. We know that there'll be ballot papers left over at any one time because turnout is not 100%. It's much less than 50%. So why are we printing ballot papers unnecessarily when, of course, you could probably just have a system where specialised printer, you print the ballot paper out for the relevant constituency as and when you need it. That's just one idea, and I'm sure that PPC, when they look at this, will be able to put more meat on the bones. And they'll tell us whether it's possible to do it for 2018. It may well actually be that in some cases, some bits are possible, other bits aren't. But I think the general principles about making voting easier, facilitating it, has to be a good thing. And I don't buy this argument that actually just because Deputy Mezek is a member of PPC, I think he's quite right to bring this to the Assembly. It is very much chicken and egg, and as I've said, it gives PPC a clear steer. No point in them carrying on doing work that we don't want them to do, but if we do want them to do the work, it certainly gives them something to perhaps crack on with to bring forward for the next electoral cycle. So I think we should all be supporting this in its entirety and get behind it.
Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. We've had some really interesting and some strong rhetoric from Deputy Labby and Deputy Martin. They're really good. That they stand up and they punch forward their points and they sound great. But it's really bizarre that we have the Privileges and Procedures Committee. So far, we've had 3 members of the committee speaking out completely against what their chairman has said in his very considered comments. And Deputy Wickenden as well has also made some very valid points. And as other members have said, we all want this. But it's just, we haven't heard from the Constable of St John yet. I'm sure he's got a restaurant-related analogy. We're probably heading for dinner or supper now, but I shall look forward to that when it comes. But ironically, and we've got another member of the Deputy Martin, another member of the PPC committee, bringing forward another proposition on machinery of government issues relating to asking the public whether we should go back to the committee system. I suggest that we try and make the privileges, and I'm not giving way, sir, which are asking for a referendum, but I mean, perhaps she should spend some time helping to make the committee she's on work first before we talk about going back there, sir. Because it appears, and she's already ready to stand up and criticise the council and ministers for not working together at every opportunity. I can tell you something: the council of ministers is an immaculate model compared to what we're seeing today, sir, when it comes to working together and making decisions, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Senator Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I have some sympathy with Deputy Mezek. I'm not supporting his proposition, but I have some sympathy because I'm sure that he looks at Hansard, and he might even have done his research, and he might go back to propositions from 2001. There was a proposition P132 in 2001, Second Amendment, lodged by I was actually sitting next to Deputy Martin at the time, right over there, where I brought forward a proposition to ask that constables, I asked really nicely, and I'm just looking to the Deputy Greffier whether or not it was actually passed, I can't remember. It was passed, thank you, Greffier, thank you, sir, through the chair. I asked for constables to send a notice to households that didn't have any voters registered. My goodness me, I did not get some stick from the constables at the time, and one particular one in St Saviour. If ever there was true of an adage of a Jersey man and woman and money not easily being parted, then certainly that has been a guiding force of the constables and in terms of their frugalness. And of course, there is an enormous amount to be done on voter turnout, registration, and voter modalities in terms of electronic voting, etc. And Deputy Wickenden is absolutely correct in what he is saying, and I know that that is the case because he and I were in Estonia, and we look forward to welcoming the Estonia ambassador with the External Relations Minister, who are holding the EU presidency next year. And interestingly, EU Parliament has dreadful voter turnout, by the way. That's maybe a bit of a problem with the EU, but coming back to the point, the fact is that there are, I'm afraid, more than just simply sending polling cards that needs to deal with our voter turnout. And Deputy Mezek and others may remonstrate. We've all brought propositions about voter turnout. I think I found 4 that I've done, because I was the first person ever to combine and get data with former Deputy Bridge and former Senator Lakeman, the late Senator Lakeman, and to actually prove what the voting turnout numbers are. Members like to use facts that they think are facts, but actually they don't do their research. And Deputy Mezek hasn't done his research either. I commend to Deputy Mezek the IDEA International website, and I'll give him the address if he likes, which is one of the global institutions which looks at voter turnout and actually the real thing that matters, which is not pure voter turnout, which is actually VAP, which is the percentage of people that are the voting age population. Now that is the figure that should be internationally compared and that we should compare ourselves on. Actually, the fact is, because of the way that our electoral registers are compiled, and this links exactly with the problem, unreformed, with sending polling cards as it is that actually there is probably, in my view, through no fault of the constables, overstatement of the numbers of people that are on the electoral register because of the 3-year rolling numbers. That will be an issue, certainly for the more transitory parishes of St Clement, St Saviour and St Helier, but there certainly will be a very significant amount of people that are registered, and I commend the work that the Constable of St Helier has done in previous elections, where he has, with his staff, tirelessly gone round and got people on the electoral register. Sadly, of course, people leave the island for various different reasons, but they're still on the register. So before members pontificate and say, we know it all about voter turnout, I encourage them to actually go and look at the data, and actually look at the data of other places who actually do not compile electoral registers in a proper way, which, if that is the case, overstates turnout, or rather gives a turnout, or gives the impression of a turnout that will be higher. I'm afraid I have to say to Deputy Mezek, he is a member of PPC. I actually think it's discourteous not to have actually discussed this at PPC, because there are those of us who serve on PPC are absolutely, the Reform Party and Deputy Mezek does not have a monopoly on what is important in terms of voter turnout and voter registration and improvement of the modalities of voter arrangements and electronic voting. All members of PPC, or at least the majority of members that I sit with, care about this issue. And frankly, bringing propositions like this, simply, we've all done it. I did it in 2001. Apparently I got that amendment passed, but my goodness me, it took years before it was actually done. It's often said that ministers are, and sometimes people say of ministers that they're weak, or that they don't get on with things. Well, actually what you've got to do to get things done in politics, if I may say to Deputy Mezek, is not just simply bring propositions here, unresearched, maybe good ideas, but actually you've got to come forward with the solution. You've actually got to come forward with the complete solution to get our voter turnout and our voter modalities and all of the ease of voting safely done, because of course there are enormous risks of inadvertent opening up of things like polling stations and actually getting quite dreadful results. And I cast aspersions on no member of this assembly who I know would not do that, but there has been cases in the past where I have witnessed myself in polling stations, people being brought into polling stations and almost, with the good work of the jurats nevertheless, actually almost being encouraged to vote in a certain way, in a way that would be inappropriate and would actually be condemned by international election observers, which I have seen of how that should be done. Now, actually, I know the constables and the returning officers and the jurats do a fantastic job, but nevertheless, we have seen things. Voter confidentiality and voter safety is of the highest importance for the integrity of the voting system. The voting system has to work, it has to be effective, it has to be equal, it has to have voter equality to the greatest extent possible, and there has to be voter equity. And there has to be a massive change, I'm afraid, in the way that effectively the electoral registers are compiled. The good news is that technology can do a lot of that. It can do a lot of the heavy lifting, and it can do a lot of the real offsetting of the controls that exist, which are actually the concerns previously of people simply popping into any single voting station where you don't know them. Parish people actually know their people. If they don't, they'll find out who they are. There are risks, I'm afraid, with anybody going to any single polling station and being unknown. Yes, they can show some form of ID, but where is the controls in Deputy Mezek's proposal in dealing with these issues? There is an issue. We all want everybody to vote. We all want to get more people out to vote, but there is the issue of voter fraud and of what has happened in other countries being very real issues. There has been previous issues in this jurisdiction about postal voting, which are alive and real issues which have caused huge concern to many people. Now, these issues are not to be simply disregarded. They are important issues which go to the foundation of what is democracy and the right to people to vote in a safe and free and fair way. I am not going to vote in favour of this, sir, because I'm not going to basically do what the States has done so many times before, which is approve a proposition just because it feels like a good thing to do and feels as though, and I know what happens, members say, go on, we'll give the committee or the minister a good slap and then everything, and then we'll come and chastise them because they haven't done it or whatever. I say to Deputy Mezek, he's on a committee, and if he's committed to voter reform and getting the electoral registers properly organised in an electronic way, harnessing the power of technology, then he'll be working to find a solution and coming forward with not a proposition that's just an expression of a desire, with no evidence, with no offsetting issues of controls. And he's not going to like it. I know he's not going to like it, sir. But I am not prepared to vote in favour of something which isn't effectively properly worked out, complete in dealing with all the modalities that need to happen for the voter registration and the voter safety. And there was an issue. I think I found 10 references to voter polling cards that I have asked for in the past in previous debates. I've never been on PPC before, and in my previous position as Treasury Minister, I offered, with the consent of the Council Ministers and the strong support, as I recall, of the Chief Minister, we offered to actually pay for, at the time, polling cards. In the UK, polling cards are dealt with freely by the Post Office. They're actually delivered free with other election materials. And we had discussions with the Jersey Post to do it. But the reality is that postal cards are not actually things that people communicate with. I don't communicate by letter and post. I communicate by email. I want a smartphone. I want a message on my phone, which basically comes up and says, you're entitled to vote tomorrow. Not only is that better and more effective and safer, but it is also going to be much more cheaply and efficiently dealt with. Those are the things that you do if you want to improve voter turnout and voter participation. It's by harnessing electronically, by having a common database, which Deputy Wickenden is doing valiant work on with other people, and Digital Jersey and his eGov team. You do that and you reform the whole system. And can we do things by 2018? Yes, we can. But let us not come forward with piecemeal propositions that are just used as a stick to come and bash PPC later with to say, no, you haven't done this. Well, I want to do some of this, but I want to do this in a different way, in a more detailed way, with technology, and come forward with a proper solution, which has been costed, so this Assembly knows what it is voting for, rather than simply an aspiration. I've done aspirational stuff before, but I have to say it hasn't worked. I did it in 2001, and I don't know when that, I don't even know whether the Council will actually do it, if I'm honest, sir, whether they do that spirit of that proposition I did in 2001. Probably didn't even get into the legislation because somebody didn't got round to it. And there's no point scolding PPC either, because they've been working hard on lots and lots of different things. A small amount of officers doing an awful lot of work. And so it's all very well members kicking PPC and by extension officers because they don't get round to do things. Time and dedication and resource, and actually some heavy lifting by the members of the committee themselves, rather than bringing effectively propositions like this. I can't vote in favour of it. I don't know whether to abstain or reject, but no to this, yes to proper, detailed proposals dealing with the whole issue of voter registration and polling cards, and the reminder of people's rights using technology, and for those who can't use technology, of course, a traditional way of a mail shot. But people can choose to opt in or opt out if you can actually do that. So let's actually do some proper work rather than just wish listing things, please, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? I call on Deputy Mezek to respond.
Thank you, sir. I want to get this point out the way right at the beginning, because I'd rather end on something positive rather than something negative. I'm really disappointed in the chairman of PPC for his comments in this speech, for the very simple reason that on the 12th of September, I emailed him with all of the things that I wanted to bring up. I asked for it to be put on PPC, and he didn't have the courtesy to respond to that email. So I think to stand up and accuse me of not having attempted to engage with PPC, when actually I did, it was him who chose not to respond, I actually think is quite out of order. I'm not as annoyed at Senator Ozer for making the same comments. He had no idea that I'd attempted to do this. And when I got no response from the chairman of the committee, I spoke to the officers, officers who Senator Ozer wants to say this is an attempt to beat or to criticise, which isn't at all. I had spoken to them. They informed me of all the progress that on some of these issues there has been in the past. On some of the issues, there's been no progress on these points. They were very helpful, and I used my conversations with them to inform how I went about with this proposition. But it is really unfair to say that I didn't attempt to engage with PPC, because I did. It's not my fault when somebody doesn't reciprocate that attempt at engagement. So I'm really disappointed with that. And I think that's been reflected by some of the other members of PPC who stood up and said that actually on some of the issues which it's been claimed progress is being made on, progress is not being made on them. These are issues which I believe can be taken as standalone issues. The reason I didn't want to bring them as part of anything wider or wait for another opportunity is because I think that they're actually relatively simple, and I think that some of the contributions, particularly that from Senator Ozer, were making things so much more complicated than they need to be. And that is why the government of this island and the Assembly of this island can often spend much more time on relatively simple issues than it needs to. It spends a lot more money than it needs to get some of this relatively simple stuff done. And that's one of the things that I believe causes disillusionment with the public, who look at what they see to be an ineffective and inefficient government process. And what I'm offering the states an opportunity here to say is, here are 3 small little things that might do something to help our democracy on the island. And I've said in my proposition, it's not a panacea to all of our problems. We have much worse problems that are deeper rooted in our democratic system that we need to be looking at. But I can't see how accepting that we want to proceed with these 3 suggestions will do anything to harm the democratic process. I simply can't see that argument. In terms of the polling cards, I mentioned in my opening remarks that this is something that's been done in the UK since 1948. The figure of £100,000 was floated for how much it would cost. I mean, I've never heard something so ridiculous. Of course it's not going to cost that much. It doesn't cost much money to get something put in a postal drop when that's being combined with what's already being put out in a postal drop. Anyway, the card is cheap. You can print labels to put different names on it. And one was that they'd have to go in envelopes because you'd give away the identity of the people living there. Well, what do they think is going to be on the envelope? The name and address is utterly ridiculous. When you get them in the Isle of Man, or you get them in the UK or other jurisdictions, you get them just the card through the post, because there's no confidential information on it that wouldn't also be on the cover of an envelope as well. So I really think that is a very strange criticism here. And it's something, as I said, that is done in many jurisdictions around the world. Jersey is one of the few places that doesn't actually do this. And if it encourages a small number of people to go out and vote when they otherwise don't, then I think that would be a good thing. And I said in my speech that too often when we discuss these issues, we think not as the typical Jersey person who does not vote. 70% of the public don't vote. So if you think like an average voter when you're determining what the voting system should be, you're not thinking the same as the average Jersey person who doesn't vote. And many of these people deliberately choose not to vote because they've got no interest at all. It's not something that bothers them one way or the other, and you'll never probably convince those people to come out and vote. So, that's fine for those. There are some who would like to vote but have very particular problems that they find difficult to overcome. For example, I've had people contact me who weren't able to vote simply because something happened on the day and there was no getting around it. They couldn't get a home visit afterwards because they'd missed the deadline or something had happened at the wrong part of the day. So you'll never get around that. But to want to speak to those people who aren't usual voters, work out what it was that didn't enable them to vote and try and address those problems must surely be a good thing. The issue of parking was brought up, how many people won't attend their polling station because it's too difficult to get parking, especially if they're working during the day and they want to go in a period afterwards where it might be busy before they've got to make their children dinner and put them to bed and what have you. So looking at where those polling stations could or should be is something that I think would hopefully aim to address that. And the chairman of PPC said, well, the election law already doesn't prescribe the location. So I think he said it was something that is then therefore being dealt with. Well, it's not, because they're the same location every time, election after election. The law may say that it is possible to have polling stations at other locations. So why isn't it looked at? Why is the discussion never had? This proposition provides us an opportunity to have that discussion. How can that possibly be a bad thing? And if we decide that actually we're happy with the current arrangement, then we get to keep the current arrangement. If we decide we want minor amendments, have 2 polling stations in one district, or move it from this place to another part of the district, what could possibly be wrong with that? And the work, as Deputy Wickenden said, is being done to look at the technological side of it. I'm not someone who has a great grasp of computer technology and programming and whatever, but my father does it professionally, and I talk to him about it and sort of get ideas about what different ways there are to do it, because computer programming in many ways is can often be more like art than like a science. I'm sure Deputy Wickenden knows what I'm talking about there in terms of how you approach creating systems to deal with these issues. It's something that can be done, so let's give the green light to it, and then it means that we don't have to have everything in place and ready to go and then end up stumbling on something procedural later on that stops us from being able to do it. There, give the green light now, then let the team get on with it and implement it, and then happy days. There's nothing that could possibly go wrong at the end of that. So I think some members' contributions, I think, were really making a mountain out of a molehill here. These are very simple things. They're not going to detract from anything whatsoever. And I would be grateful as I sit down if there are any members who are keen to vote to support one part of the proposition but don't want to support other parts. If there are any members who are inclined that way, if they could indicate that to me, and I would be happy to take parts of these separately. But if no member is keen for that to happen, then I'm happy for it all to be taken as one. And so I call for the appellate.
Bill is called for. Invite members to return to their seats.
Sir, can I ask for that to be taken separately, A, B and C, please?
You wish A, B and C to be taken separately? Certainly. Members have had the opportunity to return to their seats. Then the vote is on whether or not the state should adopt paragraph A of the proposition. I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Paragraph A is defeated. 19 votes pour, 25 votes contre, 1 abstention. I ask the greffier to reset the voting, and the vote is now on whether or not paragraph B should be adopted, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Paragraph B has been defeated. 16 votes pour, 29 votes contre, 1 abstention.
Could we have the 16, please?
Those voting for, Deputy Martin, Southern and Grouville, Kevin Lewis, Tadia, St John, Higgins, Masson, St Peter, Rondell, Mesick, Andrew Lewis, Dublé, Brie, St Mary and McClinton.
And the abstention, please.
And Senator Ozef abstained.
We come now to vote on paragraph C. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. Paragraph C has been defeated. 20 votes pour, 25 votes contre, 1 abstention. Very well. The next item is the Jersey Police Complaints Authority appointment of a chairman, P104, lodged by the Minister for Home Affairs. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, in accordance with Article 2 of and the Schedule 2, the Police Complaints and Discipline Jersey Law 1999, to appoint Mr. Howard Cooper as Chairman of the Jersey Police Complaints Authority for a period of 3 years, commencing on 1st of January 2017.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I should like to begin by paying a sincere tribute to Advocate Debbie Prosser, who has ably served as a member of the Jersey Police Complaints Authority since January of 2008 and has been chair since October 2012. The JPCA has benefited greatly not only from Advocate Prosser's experience, wisdom and knowledge, but also from her dedication and commitment over the course of 9 years of service on the authority, 4 of which have been in that key role. All of Advocate Prosser's time on the authority has been given on a voluntary basis, and I'm sure that the Assembly will join me in thanking the outgoing chair for her service and in wishing her well for the future. Members may recall that earlier this year the Assembly approved P158/2015, which reappointed Advocate Prosser as chair for a 3-year term. In that proposition, it was made clear that Advocate Prosser would be resigning from office at the end of this year and an early succession plan would be implemented. I wish once again to thank the Advocate for being clear with us regarding her intentions and for managing efficiently the recruitment process for a new chair, which has resulted in Mr. Howard Cooper being offered the role, subject to the agreement, of course, of this Assembly. Mr. Cooper has been a member of the JPCA since March 2013 and has fulfilled the role of Deputy Chair since January of last year. I'm aware that this current Chair, Mr. Cooper, have worked closely together during time on the authority, particularly since 2015, and will continue to do so over the next couple of months. It follows, therefore, that Mr. Cooper's recommended appointment has the support of the outgoing Chair. As outlined in the report to the proposition, Mr. Cooper's appointment as chairman has also been approved by the Jersey Appointments Commission. I'm confident, therefore, sir, that Mr. Cooper has the experience, knowledge and ability to undertake this important position, and I'm very pleased to recommend his appointment to members.
Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show. Those against? The proposition is adopted. Well, that brings our public business to an end, and I invite the Chairman of PPC to propose the arrangements for public business.
Yes, thank you, sir. The proposition for future public business is as per the supplementary order paper. Items for the next sitting on the 15th of November, sir, assuming they all remain on that date, because I know things do tend to move around a bit, but if they all do remain, we'll be looking at a minimum of 2 days for that sitting, sir.
Members agree with the adoption of public business in accordance with the statement of the Chairman? Very well. Public business is as set out by the Chairman. I should, before we adjourn, announce the lodging of the minimum wage revised hourly rate from the 1st of April 2017 by Deputy Mezek, P115, a ministerial government referendum amendment lodged by Deputy Martin at P94. Very well. The State stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 15th of November.